I've been staring at my painting, trying to decide how I'm going to proceed next on this. It's one of the interesting things about watercolor is that the order that you do things can make a difference on how the final result is. And so what I'm wanting to think about here is my next thing to put into here is where my darks are going to go. And remember we had this light pattern that ran down through here and then a section of dark up in here and pieces of dark, so there was sort of this other diagonal of dark that ran through this direction. Now I'm feeling like I can use this purple gray that I'm going to put in for the shadows to go into some of these dark areas up in here along with the greens that I'm going to put in. And so, you know, our basic colors that we're looking at, we've got a split complement going with our main colors in that we're working with a yellow orange and a yellowy green and a purple. And so those are sort of our three basic colors. And then we have browns that are coming in there, and we are leaning a little bit toward the blue on that gray. So that's something for us to sort of think about. There's things about the under layer that I don't want to have showing so much when we get into the further one. There is a rock in the photograph right here, but the way it's showing in my painting, it's way too dominant. It's going to have to go down quite a bit. Let's just look at values here a little bit. Shadow in here. That value is somewhere in value 2. It's maybe not quite up to value 1, but this is definitely darker here than value 1 and quite a bit darker than value 2. So this should be at least 1 to 2 values lighter than what our blacks are when we've got the darkest spots back in there. And then this rock up here, let's look at that rock. It is, yeah, it's about a value 7. And then how does that compare to our flowers? Flowers are a whole lot lighter. So that has to be several shades darker than what our flowers are, or it's going to pop out too much. And right now, I think I've got it lighter than the flowers, and that's what's driving me crazy. So I've got it at about value 9. My flowers are darker than that. So this has to go several shades darker than what my lightest places on those flowers are. Okay, so let's dive in. What I want to sort of do first, let me get my photo back up here where I can see it. I've got it right in front of me. Is that I wanted to get a little bit more feeling of green. There's some leaves that are going to be coming off of that branch, and I want to get the feeling of that happening before I paint the background. So there's going to be some leaves that come off of this, maybe not quite that dark, and maybe with a smaller brush. I mix it in my pan darker than what I'm going to use because I can always thin it. I can't always make it thicker. So having it a little thicker in the pan than what I need it in the end. And I don't want to get that detailed with that. Let's just make this into a patch of color, and I'll worry about detailing it when I get some of the other parts of it happening. And this flower, I'm seeing there's green down close to that flower, and I want that in there. This stem, remember we wanted to let that stem stand out light. Just getting some of that background color in there, and then all of this will end up getting more work on it later. And that's light. This guy here can have a little bit of green on him. Okay. And then maybe this rock right now, before I start doing shadows and stuff, let's go ahead and make him a little bit darker. And dull it down a little bit with a little purple on it. There's going to be even darker places happening in here, but yeah, and then make sure that that works across through there. There's going to be a lot darker places, but at least now that's darker than my flowers are. Same with up in this area here. Let's get some of this darker than my flowers as well. And once again, it moves a little bit into the brown side. I'll let that sort of touch some of that. And this is going to get some darker shadows running across it, but its base color needed to go darker. And I'm going to just let that be another one of those buds. You don't always know when you're painting them how dark it's going to feel, but it's easy enough to come in and do this sort of correction stuff. But I have to be careful around the edge of things because that will show. So let's get that right up onto there. And space right here, it feels like it needs a little something. Okay, now I can let that dry while I start working down in this foreground area. So the shadows, the further away they are from the flowers, sort of the softer their edges are, and the closer they are, the crisper they are. Now, whether I'm going to be able to manage that, I don't really want to dampen this whole area and then put those shadows on, because then they'll really run. But I may be able to soften these edges after I put them down. Now remember, the shadows are just a flat color. There is no shaping in it. And so we're just going to put that down fairly wet. But I do need the shape of that to happen. So there's some interesting shapes in these shadows that really sort of say flowers and the type of flower they are. So that's important to get those shapes and get that working. But it is just a flat area. It's not 100% black, but it is quite dark. Maybe that needs to go a little bit darker. Let's put a little more paint in there. Stir my paint up. It's settled just a little bit since I mixed it up. Now this paint that I'm using, it is a mixture of ultramarine blue, quinacridone rose, and burnt sienna. I put the burnt sienna into the purple to make it a little more gray, and tried to lean a little toward the blue side when I did the mixture between the ultramarine blue and the quinacridone rose. And there's a fairly big blotch here. I'm seeing a piece of green. Well, maybe I can just paint around it like that. I see a piece of green that's going to come into there that's part of a one of the seed pods that's forming on those flowers. The one thing, there's certain things that are distinctive about different flowers, and the very distinctive thing about California poppies is the way the seed pod forms and what its shape is. And so that's going to be an important thing for us. So the flower bud and the seed pod, the two of them, become, let's just take that a little bigger there. Keep this as flat color as I can. Painting my biggest shapes first, and then I'm going to come back in with a smaller brush and do the tighter pieces. Okay, so things are a little bit different than my photograph, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about that too dreadfully much. And how are those pieces sort of going across there? Now this dark, as I bring it in, this is what I'm defining the edge of those flowers with. So it's very, very important for me to find the edge of those flowers and then come back and paint the rest of the area. I like how that orange is in underneath of there. That's a nice thing. Let's see, there's a little sort of poop back that way. The petals on the California poppies are sort of crinkled a little bit on the edges, and I don't know if I can get that. I can just do a little bit of it here with the tip of my brush coming in and finding the edge of that. In some places it's quite smooth, and in other places it's got a little crinkle to it. And it's easier to come in and be pretty straight on there to start with, and then maybe come back and find that crinkle. have certain things drawn on here, and they may or may not be right for the photograph, but I want to sort of cover those lines up, so I'm going to just go with what I have. No problem if this is off a little bit. And then I'll come in and I'll do those skinny lines later. This is another, it's got a little turn back, and it's this flower right here that is being projected down onto the ground here. I think what I'm going to do to soften these is after it's totally dry, oh, and there's another flower right up here, which is going to be this one, and okay, that's my other big solid piece. Let's come back and get the rest of this little guy. And it's got a turn that comes off there, and then there's another shadow. There's a shadow between these two pieces that comes right up to the edge of that. Okay, and actually it's going to come up to the edge of this too, but I'm going to need to find some of this green leaf stuff when I do, because some of that's going to show through. Just finding a little bit of that crinkle. There's a bit of a notch here, but it's not real deep. And then this just comes out and it's all flat. And then once again, this has a little bit of, showing a little bit of that crinkled edge in the shadow. And we're letting this come out. There's a little bit of greenery that's going to come up into that, so I'm going to leave a little space for that. And that can get green put into it later. Now I'm going to use some of this purple to start finding my dark places up above here. And I can do dark green, I can do purple. The purple's going to make it more black looking. And is this brush going to be okay? I need to find some of that feeling of that split leaf of the poppies here. So just let that go into there just a little bit. Yes. Now let's see, there's a little bit in here, and it's gonna, I go inward, I can get a nice sharp little corner. If I start in there, I'm gonna have a little round corner where the tip of my brush sat down. I might end up having to put a little bit of a wash over the top of that. And now I want this sort of broken because we've got leaves coming out here. And we want that feeling of those split leaves without getting into too much detail. And we're going to find the edge of this flower. There we go. And then find those split leaves. And do we need to run a little bit of, let's just drop a little bit of green into this damp area. Okay. This all gets pretty complicated when I start doing all of the little fill-ins there. Is this dry enough for me to do my skinny lines on that dark? It's not really. I need to be careful about not getting my hands over into that area, and I'm just wondering whether this brush is a bit big for what I'm doing with the little small lines. I'm going to go down to one size on my brush. Yes and no. It's hard. It's hard to know what the best thing is. Let's still do a little bit of mid-tone darkish green in this area. And once again, I'm just doing it in little marks to make it look like it's that and I'm leaving a few light spots behind, but I want it to look like it's the split leaves of the California poppies. And then as I find these edges, I can make a little crinkle on them, and then maybe that comes out. There's some places here. What can I do with this big brush? Do I need to do a smaller brush? Really holding this high and getting the tip of that brush working, and then it's a little darker right in that corner, and maybe even a little darker. Let's drop some dark in there. And I really shouldn't be working down in this area. I should be working up there. Oh, it's hard to force myself to do what needs to be done right. I'm going to stop for a minute because I need to get away from this and look at it from a distance. So I'm going to stop, look at it, and then hopefully by then it'll be dry.